Hello, welcome back to session 4 of Behind the Sessions, and let's get right into it. So firstly, one thing I wanted to cover right away was the challenge that I set for myself ahead of this session. And that challenge, plain and simple, was simply to see whether or not I was going to be able to make the players like Dariss after he literally just got finished brutally murdering one of them at the end of the last session. Now that's obviously, probably not the easiest thing in the world to pull off, and I knew that, and for that reason, of course, you hopefully are coming here after watching the actual Wollen Retold episode 4, in which you see that by the end of it, at the end of the session, I have a group of rebels working for the centaur government and essentially an entirely different spectrum of characters that would all help the players to defeat and or kill Dariss should they decide they don't like him and they want to essentially take revenge, bring him down, and so on and so on. And yet, I'm very happy to say that, spoiler alert, that's not what ends up happening, and thus the challenge I presented to myself was successful. So taking it right back to the start, we carry on with the party after poor old, depending on how you view him, because he's not exactly our most sympathetic character, but Zook was killed off by Dariss in a very Negan-ish fashion from The Walking Dead. And now, following in sort of the traditional line of Negan's character from The Walking Dead, we get to see if we can make him anywhat redeemable and more of a... I don't want to say likable character because, I mean, Negan in The Walking Dead is extremely charismatic and Dariss is very much the same. That being said, like I've mentioned before, after starting at the exact same place with the two characters, with taking direct inspiration from the character of Negan and using that to inspire Dariss, I immediately and quickly started moving Dariss in very much his own direction, as his own standalone character, with a different backstory, different background, different motivations. It was going to slowly alter his course of actions going forth. And now that the players were essentially left off the hook to go and explore, as you see in the episode, they quickly find they can't leave the city, and they, of course, have to report tomorrow for their branding day, the name of the session. And a big part of this was knowing I only had until the end of this one session before I was going to have the party decide, do we like this guy enough to keep working with him and maybe wait for a better opportunity down the line to take him down? Or perhaps even just genuinely want to continue working with this guy after all. Either that would happen by the end of the session, or they'd say, nope, great, got an opportunity to help fight against him? Absolutely, let's go for it. And truth be told, and I think I've mentioned this before, if not, just to be clear now, Dariss, of course, did not exist. I know I've mentioned that before the third session, session 1 and 2, coming into Wollen, all the preparation, the planning, and all the stuff that I built for the sandbox world. One of the very few things in the actual whole series that I didn't account for or plan ahead of time was Dariss himself, which is ironic considering he's arguably one of the best parts of this whole campaign. And so with that being the case, I did automatically assume the players in the party would choose to work with people to take down Dariss from the start. So while I wanted to use the session to try and see if I could shake that idea, I did not actually expect I'd succeed. And I don't want to give the wrong impression here. The way I'm speaking, it isn't as if I had essentially a goal set and it was, something for me to celebrate that I moved a certain goal towards a finish line that I wanted. Terrible metaphor that, but what I'm trying to say is that it's nothing to do with me as a DM and nothing for me to be celebrated, that the party on their own intuition, what am I looking for? The party essentially, they chose to like Dariss. They chose based on what they saw of him and how they judged him and what happened throughout the entire episode. That has, again, nothing to do with me, regardless of what I tried to push and what I didn't. Ultimately, the party made a choice. And that what I'm trying to say. God, I went in circles there, didn't I? So, while I did not really have any strong expectations that they would eventually end up deciding to stick with Dariss, become loyal to him, and keep working for this guy who is certainly morally questionable in his deeds, um, it was certainly a fascinating twist that I was very much looking forward to in the coming sessions to write out how it would look as these guys start working for essentially an underworld gang in a large city. And it's very much a deviation that I welcomingly appreciate from what I expected going in to be much more of a, of course, an open world and a free choice, but ultimately I thought more of a hero's journey sort of story of these small, young, beady-eyed, naive adventurers really starting to step into the roles of heroes and whatever else. And yeah, they chose to not be quite as conventional or as predictable as that. So it became quite a fun story to watch along for as I wrote it out for them as they went. And hopefully, for you now watching, I hope Wollen Retold is able to invoke a similar interest of, okay, so where is it going next? Which is how I was feeling at the time. So throughout the day, one major thing that I really wanted to capture when it came to having Dariss be potentially someone that the characters could start to go, okay, he's not a complete awful person that I hate and I do not like and I don't want anything to do with, and I'll betray him the first chance I get. Betray may be the wrong word, considering Dariss is forcing the party into conscription in the first place. But one major thing, I think the only one that was a definitive, like, if I get the chance, I have to do this, was to ensure that when they got their shark fin tattoos, which was, of course, I've already seen used by the sharkin they killed in the tavern at the end of the last session, which, of course, summoned Dariss to then help him, admittedly too late, but certainly was able to avenge him. I wanted the party to have an opportunity, in some way or another, with the shark brand fins being the most shark fin brand, being the most obvious way to achieve that said outcome, where Dariss would come in and actually live up to the claims and the statements that he makes in the branding warehouse, where he says we're a team now, we're going to work together, whatever differences we had, we are now united against the Centaurian government. These people are far more corrupt, and we are trying to, in our own backward and messy way, we are trying to actually give people a fighting chance in the city. We are trying to establish a form of peace, very much in a vigilante style. And so I was thrilled when, as I'd hoped, after they decided to leave the mansion where they'd got everything they wanted to collect and take with them, they were accosted by a few guards. They immediately decided, hey, let's take advantage of this opportunity that was given to us, and let's see what happens if we actually try to get Shark and Dariss to come out and, have a go. And he did. He came out swinging, quite literally. And it was a very interesting thing to watch how quickly the party could go, okay, we like this. That one thing I remember is the one thing for the whole session where I saw the players at the table actually, you could see the gears in the heads turn to go, oh, hang on, maybe this guy doesn't completely suck. And yeah, admittedly, it's a little bit distressing considering he murdered their friend right in front of them, and this guy's got a reputation for being, a mob boss, gang leader, criminal type. It's amazing simply having him come by and kill more innocent people in cold blood, this time just on their behalf, was all it took for them to immediately turn around and go, yep, okay, no, good, you're our friend now, we're okay with that. Didn't take much to impress the party. And so we watch the day go throughout, and we get them to start doing some jobs and test the waters for what they feel comfortable with and what they don't. And, I don't think they were necessarily thrilled by the idea of having to start getting the inkling of a feeling that they are starting to become the people they hated when they got to the city. They didn't like the sharking coming around and exploiting people and, basically taking protection money. Even if the Tooth Takers actually did, it wasn't like it wasn't a buzzword, it wasn't false advertisement. They would essentially strongly intimidate you into actually paying for protection money. But to their credit, the Tooth Takers, that wasn't simply just, layered words for taking a bribe or taking, extorting money. They really were actually still protecting people. They did clean up the city. Dariss and his Tooth Takers were able to, long before the party got here, slowly wipe out the other criminals in the city until there's only one organised crime left, and they, as a, filling that huge power vacuum that was wiped out by the rest, able to make, criminals with morals. Sharkins had a lot of rules that they lived by, they did not cross. There were a lot of terrible and awful things that other criminal gangs and things would have done that the Tooth Takers had a hard stance against. And it's just very... I don't know, it's an interesting thing because... And I try not to, especially as a DM in the game when I'm playing, I try very hard to avoid having personal bias come in on my end, or try to be in any way having an influence or trying to state an opinion of mine about characters or about a situation that I happen to have written, they happen to be playing, because I understand the position of power I have as a DM. I do not want to in any way, good or bad, I don't want to bias or influence how my party feels about any given thing. I always leave it open to interpretation. I give a lot of different characters with a lot of different senses of moral and complexity, especially as we continue to go forth and to dive deeper into the story, because I understand it's still early days now. And I don't actually come by very often at all to say, hey, this person is a great person, this person is an evil person. Even if I personally feel that way about a character, I do not try to write them that one-dimensional, and I certainly never encourage my players, outside of extreme cases where I say, yeah, this person exists just to be terrible. Like, right away, first session, Patrick Walsh is designed to be unlikable, is designed to be quite a problem person, and that ultimately is done to kind of carry the plot forth and serve a greater purpose. So beyond that, it is a curious thing that because I can say it now, but it's so much later on and my players, this won't influence them afterwards, I truly never saw Dariss as... And I'm careful here, because I realise he has killed a lot of people. But I struggle to see, that's a good way of putting it, I struggle to see Dariss as an actual bad guy. He is barely written to be like one. He is I do think he seems to me kind of like the good guy or the hero in a really, really ugly world, which I promise I will stop making references back to it. I don't know why I do so much, because again, it is by no means close to anywhere near what I'd consider a good show, or one of my favourite shows, especially for its whole thing. But The Walking Dead, once again, is a great example where the main characters, after several seasons in, are the main characters and are more decent to people than the enemies that they are fighting, but in a world like The Walking Dead, in any sort of post-apocalyptic world at that point, I think there is a fair argument that, by the standards we would hold to people who aren't in a zombie apocalypse, and the main characters of The Walking Dead eventually are not even close to good people. That's kind of where I'm coming from. There's goodness in them for sure. They're not. They do a lot of bad things, and it'd be very hard to justify if they were in a less harsh world, obviously. And Dariss is much the same way. He is doing very extreme things. He is doing very complicated and very morally questionable activities. But he is actually pushing back against what, at least in Dariss's opinion, maybe or maybe not my own, Dariss does believe that he is actually doing very questionable things to push back against a much worse force, believing that the government of the city is so much more corrupt and so much worse, and he's actually doing all the things that he does to fund and support and push the agenda towards being able to take down these corrupt people in power that have far too much authority and want all the rest of it that they don't have yet. And he doesn't trust them at all. But anyway, that's just giving some more insight to how much of a person that I enjoy that Dariss is, and you know where he's going. And there's a lot more to explore as we keep going, because as I said, Dariss will ultimately become, and is essentially now, the official BBEG of this campaign, and he he certainly has a role to play. So that's probably more than enough information on him and his sort of insight into his character for now. Now that being said, one other thing to touch on, which of course is a very exciting thing because it doesn't happen too often, but this is the first time we've had a new character for the party, a main character so to speak, introduced into the world, into the campaign, after the, of course, introduction of characters come in preset and established. So our dear favourite Zack the player, portraying our not so much favourite player character Zook, who is extraordinarily problematic, and of course what I have just said was, of course, you know, said in the sense of jest. I do not want to ever act in seriousness. I don't want to, you know, elevate or put any sort of ranking to my actual players as real life friends and people that I bring to the table and so on else. It's never a judgment about like who's the best player or who does, you know, the best combat or the best role play or anything of that sort. Everyone has their own elements and things to the table. But I do feel so much more comfortable making judgments and harsh comments towards the player characters, because Zook is certainly a murder hobo, and rest in peace, of course, but maybe not rest too peacefully, because you know you were truly an unhinged menace. So bringing in Palin was certainly a very interesting change of pace. I don't want to get, you know, too far ahead on this point, but one could also argue maybe not as much of a change of pace as we might have expected. And to unfold on that, we essentially traded out, as I think we said in the video, we trade out a murder hobo for a loot goblin. And a loot goblin is better, certainly. That's objectively, full stop, better than a murder hobo. Now that being said, not significantly better. So we still had another morally unhinged character from Zack, who, to his credit, certainly was different, and we really get to see an idea of how different in coming sessions, and I'll talk about that at the time. But at this moment, when of course, unfortunately, we had Zook killed off, Zack, of course, had to go back to the drawing board, and I was there to look over his shoulder and guide him a little bit as he talked about it. But he had to go back to the drawing board and consider what other character he'd like to play now. He did not have a backup character planned or anything, of course. First time playing D&D, he's only played 3 sessions, and boom, he's been wiped out. Start over again. So one thing we did, he gave us a few classes to look at that he was considering that he liked, and one of the ones that he mentioned wanting to try was a paladin. And as soon as I heard that, I immediately, perhaps a little bit too much, I very much pushed him towards that, as I tried to talk to him about it and reason. And of course I always let him know, of course I told him, you know, despite what I say, if you do decide to go in a different direction, I will in no way judge that or give you a harsh time. I accept any class or whatever else you want to play, and we work together to like find something to make it work and introduce him to the next session. But thankfully, he was willing to listen and hear what I had to say about why he should be a paladin. So he took my advice and he went with it. And what I argued was that it would be really fun after having him play a character like Zook, who was, you know, the worst. It would be really fun to play a paladin where he would be bound by an oath mechanic, so to speak, that would keep him in line to a certain extent, where he'd have to be somewhat good and noble and honest to the people around him, to the people that to the players in the party, and to the NPCs that he interacts with in a way that Zook would not have been. And that would have been a really fun way to watch, and of course, you know, to kind of, I suppose stretch is the word, stretch that role-playing muscle that he was already starting to develop, and would certainly go on to do extraordinarily well. He would become quite comfortable with the idea of portraying and acting as different types of people, and being very good at making choices that did not always actually benefit him in real life, and he would not meta game around it. So those are very admirable things and qualities in any player that you must praise and reward anytime you can. So that being said, one thing we did find, and Zach will be the first person to ever bring this up and make this clear when he talks about Palin now in hindsight. In the time that he played Palin, he does admit that Palin, and we all agree, and there's no judgment, but we all agree that Palin was not his strongest character, definitively his weakest one. And by all means, I'm sure in Wollen Retold, he comes across fine and is, a bit of a breath of fresh air, and he's an interesting character, certainly. But he simply... It is a difficult thing to essentially get into completely, and maybe it's a better thing to do down the end of a line when we've seen Palin for longer. But as you might have already been able to tell from this first session, any ideas we had, and what we did try to do with having Palin be... bound by an oath, and a righteous paladin that had strict and moral codes that were in line to keep him and behave, were very, very, very quickly, if not perhaps immediately, overshadowed by our new player Zach, who is still getting into D&D, of course, and his impulsive nature to want to act certain ways, or to test the waters and to step on toes a little for a reaction, and have a bit of fun with it, which is all well and good, fine if you're doing it in good in a good faith. It did lead to, unfortunately, Palin being in no possible way a conceivable paladin that was actually living up to any kind of oath that was decent. So we essentially, mid-session, kind of just retroactively had to retcon it that Palin, was not going to be an actual paladin anymore. He would have to be an oathbreaker, and thus we just essentially kind of, halfway through we had to stop and look at some of the stuff that Zach was already getting Palin to do and be like, I guess this guy is an oathbreaker after all then, is he? And they're like, yeah. And it was just kind of moving forward where we're like, all right, yeah, we have created a slightly better, but still problematic party member for the main cast, which cool. It still adds a spice. It's comedic in nature, and there's a lot of fun to be had there. But that's what we mean when we say Palin, unfortunately, couldn't quite live up to the ideology, the intention behind the character to be something more, maybe more challenging, more fresh, more new for Zach as a player, instead of getting kind of typecasting himself into being the one who always plays the problem character. And to say that, not wanting to give too much away for the future, but at some point when Zach had an opportunity to play more characters, maybe in this campaign, maybe in other campaigns that came after it, where we got to see that Palin was walking. And in doing so, by Palin walking, Zach, for all his new characters going forth to the time that I am now recording this, every other character he had afterwards could then run. Because Palin was the intermediary area where slowly we got to see Zach start to get a proper feeling for the role play and starting to appreciate the differences between the character he played now and the character he was playing, i.e. Palin and Zook. And then once he started to be able to recognize and get a feel for role-playing a different personality as the same person that he is in real life, and it kind of exploded from there, and he really got developed, and it was like a cool thing early on for a new player of D&D from my perspective, to be able to go and start to get a really good feel for what roleplay is and how to separate yourself from your character and start to really kind of branch out and have all these different aspects to pull on for portraying different personalities and having characters that are trying to achieve different goals and having different motives behind their actions. So maybe that's a testament going forth to just DMs in general, and especially to the players, that maybe when you're getting into the D&D, when you want to get better at role playing sort of thing, if you want to be able to act you might see in YouTube videos Critical Role, with the most obvious and easy example. maybe just a great thing for anyone, actor or not, is simply to intentionally, force yourself in some way or another to play a lot of different types of personality characters extremely early on. So you're immediately getting a feeling, as you're just getting into it, for the different types of ways that you can kind of play D&D without playing the same character every time. It certainly worked for him, but that being said, as I've mentioned, it was awesome to know that Palin was essentially the walking character so others could run later, and it was definitely, Palin was perhaps the best way to finish off and conclude it. Palin would be Zach's worst character, and his most important one, in the context that he allowed every other character he made from then on out to be extremely more nuanced and fleshed out and built, and it really did open so many doors for Zach as a player. Now, I've gone on about that long enough, and that gives you the rundown on the most important things of the session. The one last thing I do want to touch upon, this will be a smaller niche thing, so feel free to click off now if you're done and bored, by all means, don't blame you. But for those who are interested, I said, as a first-time DM who has never done this before, and this at this point being my 4th session I've ever run for the just in general, this being a very, very new thing to me, I had went ahead 3 months in advance, as I said in the first episode. I had gone into extreme detail, making a full world and map and cities and locations and characters, having a fully fleshed out idea like different quests and things, to make an open world sandbox that I wanted the players to have the opportunity, like Skyrim for example, to be able to kind of go around and explore anywhere and interact with different people at will, not railroaded, not set in like a certain designated path they have to go to X and X and X because the story and the plot demands they do, but rather they would go around moving freely, and as they did so and as they made choices and actions, and that would come with various different good and bad consequences depending on the situation in a realistic sense, I would be able to build and write a story that was adapting and existing around them as where they travelled. And I liked it. I liked it. The idea of doing that was quite fun to me. And that being said, it was not just really fun, it was extraordinarily exhausting and time draining. It was mentally very difficult, because I was not, as I am now, far more optimized, and having taken from these experiences that were very tough at the beginning, I now know how to do a far better job of being able to construct and understand what I had no idea what I was doing to begin with. Now I know. I have templates in my head. I have sort of mental exercises and things that I go over. I know how to plan optimally. I know what sort of things I can realistically expect to need in a given campaign and in a given session, and what things I need to like do a lot of brushing up on, or go over, or rehearse, or make sure to like write notes inside of my DM screen ahead of the day, so that way I know what things to like draw on quickly. And those are things I all didn't have then. So making something as ambitious as an open world sandbox made things so much harder for me. Now, the reason I'm saying all this, and the reason I bring this up, is because I accidentally, which I had no idea until after I'd already essentially done it, and then gone, oh, that was an accident, but that's actually really helpful, is by bringing in Dariss, by having him and recruit them to be truth takers, all things that I decided when I was making session 3, and I knew I needed to have someone like something like Dariss exist to be an antagonist to and foil to Mr. Big Fish in a Small Sea, Zook and his Staff of Fire, who was going to just continue to be a trailblazing problem until he faced any kind of adversary that he couldn't simply overpower and move on to the next one to butcher more innocents. So, coming down to that, when I accidentally led to a situation that I hadn't intended for, where I suddenly realised the players can't leave the city, Dariss's men have eyes everywhere, and he can teleport as he wishes, wherever he needs to be. So even if they do escape or bypass guards they may be able to win a fight with, and that's up in the air to begin with, because they're still very low level. The issue is that even if they could escape, Dariss would be able to simply be alerted and teleport over them and get them, and that'd be game over. So they were suddenly locked into a confined single city that I already had enough details fleshed out on to have something to work with. And I realised after the fact that I had actually accidentally done myself a huge favour as a very early DM who was being very overwhelmed and having a lot of trouble figuring out where to focus all my effort and what eggs and what baskets to place them in and so on else about how to navigate all the extensive planning that needs to be done for an open sandbox, especially when I'm so new to it. That this, I don't know, I mean, don't know if I want to go this far because I certainly don't know how things would have happened, and I don't necessarily not sure if I fully would believe this is the outcome. But it's an interesting idea to entertain the possibility that if I hadn't done this with Dariss, and I hadn't quickly early on, after a few sessions of being very mentally taxed out and drained from trying to prepare and have so many things kept in my head in case they came up, if they go this way or that way or whatever else, or they do this unexpected thing, that maybe, hypothetically, if I hadn't done it, perhaps the campaign would have crumbled and this, what you're hearing right now, would never have existed because I would have burned myself out completely as a new DM way too quick if I hadn't had some way to kind of optimize and kind of reduce the CPU, so to speak, of everything I need to feel like I'm ready to load in at a moment's notice. Because when you're stuck in one city and these guys couldn't leave, and I knew that for the next few sessions at least there was no way they'd be strong enough or powerful enough or whatever, just because of how much of a serious threat and powerful being like that Dariss was as like a essentially like an in-game boss, more or less. It was it just kind of guaranteed that I would only have to work in this very small confined area. All of my effort now, I knew for certain, while there are still, everything I've mentioned still existed on a smaller scale, I still didn't know what they'd do at every given time. They still had the free will and choice when they weren't following certain orders or instructions given to them on a daily basis by Dariss as a sort of small thing they have to complete before they can go about their day. I still had to, they could go to different locations I may not be expecting, they could talk to a lot of NPCs, they might start like side questing things and whatever else. But I could put all of the effort that I was already putting into every week into the whole map of Wollen in case they went anywhere at any given time. And now all that effort could be then now put only into a place where I felt there was a much higher chance they would actually interact with it at some point and actually benefit from it. And it was really fulfilling as a DM to know that all this work you're doing, all this writing you're putting into scripting and planning and all these things you're building, these battle maps and stuff, it was so nice to feel like you actually believed most of it would be seen by your players and in some way recycled if not. Whereas beforehand, very, very difficult to long-term keep yourself going, making so much effort and putting so much effort into things that you felt more confident your players would probably never see most of. So you'd spend hours and hours over your desk or your computer at home working, preparing for this sort of stuff and thinking to yourself, damn, this is probably never going to be relevant. And I am glad to say, for the most part, that wasn't true long term. I did manage to, as they eventually would get the chance to explore most of Wollen at some point or another, it was cool that most of what I had done, maybe like 80% of it, did get to be seen. Though, that being said, of course, if they had gone and lingered in these places for longer, there would be more things I could have right and fleshed out for them. And yeah, no, it was all good fun. So I am happy on the note that happened, and I am certainly grateful that I managed to find a way, not on purpose, to make things more condensed and easier by tightening the scope significantly, and allowed me as a DM to actually really get a chance to not have so much on my plate and instead really focus in on the players and the story they were starting to develop for themselves, because they were already involved in a whole criminal underworld gang that I had not even had ready or thought of when we first started the campaign just a matter of weeks ago. So it was very fun to get to explore where this was going, and I could then really put an emphasis on what things they would actually encounter. So yeah, it was great. It was awesome. Now, I'm sure I've already repeated myself a little bit too much in this episode anyway. I feel like it's gone long enough. I think we've passed the 30-minute mark, and I've just finished completing the little bullet points of everything I wanted to make sure I covered in this episode. So for that sake and reason, I will end it here. Thank you very much for listening, and I very much look forward to seeing how you guys feel as you continue to watch Wollen Retold and see what you think of these next coming episodes. Because, as you can probably imagine, things aren't about to slow down anytime soon. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time for session 5.